People are way too quick to regurgitate information without having a semblance of an understanding of what they're reading slash hearing. It's killed so much productive potential fashion discourse. Yeah, that's definitely true. Also what I think is one of the biggest issues. I think that one of the biggest issues is that there's a difference between like having an opinion online and then being knowledgeable about that opinion. So someone like me, for example, I work in the industry in many different regards. So when I say certain things, like there's aspects of fashion that I have expertise in and then aspects that I don't. Am I the all-knowing person on every single construction technique of a garment? No. Which is why I have loads of friends that are designers that if I don't understand something, I will ask them, can you explain this specific thing? Like, can you explain what this is? How do you do this? Some of them, I might even go to their house so they can show me in person how exactly like they do that technique, right? Because they are the experts on that. Where I'm the expert is fashion business, production things, supply chains, because I work with brands on this and I visit like factories. Like I've been there. I've seen it. I know what the machinery is like. I know what machinery these brands use. I know how the supply chain works. I've been to a lot of these farms. I've visited all these fabric mills. Like I've been to all these places myself. The problem is a lot of people that like talk about quality of fashion or fabrics have never visited a fabric mill a day in their life. They've never gone to a cotton farm. They've never visited a factory. So they're kind of just going off like, not actual real knowledge. It's just like this person said something and I kind of learnt this thing from, this thing that this person said rather than working with actual like factories and mills and stuff. So I think that's a big issue with discourse because I think that if you're a journalist and you read like financial reports or you're very knowledgeable about the inspiration behind a certain brand, I think your understanding of a certain brand is very valuable and analyzing that. But then, I don't know, fronting yourself as an expert on fabric quality when you've not visited a factory or fabric mill, you have no experience with that, and you've never designed clothing a day in your life, how could you actually possibly know anything about fabric quality? Like, how could you actually know? So I think that's actually more the big issue with fashion discourse, that people present themselves about experts on things that they don't really have a lot of experience with. But that's why I'm trying to change like discourse, because a lot of things that I do behind the scenes, I don't actually make content about it. I just stick to like live streams and covering topics. So I'm starting to actually sooner or later, obviously most of these things I still won't be allowed to film, but where I can actually, film these things and show you guys what these things look like and who these people are and stuff where I can. But yeah, what differentiates a fashion enthusiast from a fashion consumer? I've had so many people say I'm into fashion when in reality they're buying tons of clothes. No, I think you can be an enthusiast and a consumer. So I think buying a lot of clothes means that you're into fashion. Reason being, I think if you buy a lot of clothes, you have invaluable experience on clothing. So earlier I was talking about my experience with André Meister quality. Now the only reason why I can speak about, how the quality has changed over the years is because I have garments from each time period to show for it. And during those time periods, I have friends that stock, André Meister in their stores. So literally I would go to André Meister showrooms at Paris Fashion Week with my friends who own these stores, who are buyers, and I would constantly see season to season how the clothing was, touch the fabric, see how the fabrics are made, look at the quality. So I could see how it changed. So someone that buys a lot of clothes kind of knows that too. Like if you buy a lot of clothes because you have a lot of money or whatever, like a lot of like rich, I don't know, luxury consumers, they're actually very knowledgeable about certain things. Maybe not the history of fashion, maybe not how things are made, maybe not the business side, but in terms of, I bought this Chanel bag 5 years ago. I bought another one this week. This one is way worse. I think that makes their experience invaluable, to be honest. So I think if you buy a lot of clothes, you can also be a fashion enthusiast. I think there's just different ways of being a fashion enthusiast. Sometimes you can be a fashion enthusiast by not buying anything, but being really obsessed on the idea behind a brand. And I think that still makes you just as valid of a fashion enthusiast. I think, yeah, a lot of people, so long as you show like a proper interest in fashion, I think you can be a fashion enthusiast. I think then there's a difference between like fashion expert and fashion enthusiast. Like that's a whole different thing. I've seen people call themselves experts and I'm like, okay, slow down. Like a fashion expert would be if you're like, who is an expert on, textiles, that would be someone that works at a fabric mill or someone that owns a fabric mill, right? Who is an expert on the economics behind fashion business? That would be a business analyst that works directly with fashion brands, which I kind of do. Just saying. I don't know who is an expert with. That's kind of that's what an expert is. Like, an expert is someone that genuinely in real time is working closely and directly in that thing. So, am I an expert in fashion design techniques? No. Am I an expert in fashion business? To certain regards, yes, because I work with a lot of fashion brands on business strategy. Am I an expert in marketing? Yes, because I work with fashion brands directly on their marketing strategy. Do I know how garments are made? Yes, because I visited farms, factories, mills over and over again. I do it all the time. Like, just 4 months ago, I visited a fabric mill. Like I've told you guys that are in the Patreon, sorry, not Patreon, Discord. Discord is free. Join if you want. Guys that are in the Discord know that I'm going to a factory soon. Like, I do this all the time. This is what I do constantly. So yeah, I just think sometimes we mix expert and enthusiast. We kind of use them interchangeably. I think they are two different things. But I think enthusiasts have a lot of value. I think a lot of them have knowledge on things and an understanding of things that I think is very, very valuable. Even if you're just a consumer. I think sometimes there's there's discourse online that it's like, if you're a fashion consumer, you're not a real enthusiast because all you do is buy clothes. But I don't really agree with that. I think actually in the process of buying a lot of clothing, you actually become like a big enthusiast. And you also have a lot of knowledge on clothing just based on the fact that you buy a lot of clothes. There's like actually a lot of value to that. I'm a fashion enthusiast, but I'm too poor to buy new clothes, so I stick with the ones I have and restyle them or DIY or borrow. Yeah, and that's what I was saying. Like, you can be a fashion enthusiast in many different ways. Like, you don't have to buy clothing to be a fashion enthusiast. You can do different things and be a fashion enthusiast. I have Yoji pieces I rarely wear, but keep because they're beautiful. Yeah, that's amazing. Just admire them. Like a piece in a museum. Someone says I'm a consumer. Exactly. Nothing wrong with being a consumer. I'm a consumer too. I don't buy a lot of clothes, but I'm definitely a consumer. I'm fine not being an expert. This is just entertainment for me. I wouldn't even say I'm yes. Yeah, I don't think anyone needs to be an expert. I just think that honestly, you only need to be an expert on something if you're going to speak with authority on something. That's the only time you should even care about being an expert. I don't think most people need to care. I think for me, it's important to be an expert because I cover fashion and I talk about fashion. So the more things I'm involved with, like literally directly in the fashion industry, the better understanding I have of it, which means the better, coverage I can do on it, right? So that's kind of when you would need to be an expert. If you're the one like saying, I'm an authority, like I, share opinions and stuff and all this sort of stuff. I cover fashion in that way. But most people are not doing that. So 99% of people don't care about fashion shows and are not affected by said shows. Only fashion people care about fashion shows. Making political statements in a runaway show does nothing except circle jerk. Yes and no. Yes, because, most people don't look at runaway shows and don't care and are not like involved in runaway shows. So that's true. I definitely agree with that. And so making like, a political statement is kind of performative in a way because like I do think, and I always think this, by the way, about fashion people. I always think this. In fashion, there are certain activists that do their activism within the realm of fashion. And I find it like counterproductive because it's like you're literally singing to the choir. Like, the fashion industry is one of the most open-minded, welcoming, safe spaces out of almost every industry that exists. So if you're talking about, certain issues, like especially like political issues, it's very likely that the people that you should be screaming at are not like people in fashion. It's most likely going to be people outside of fashion. And when I say people in fashion, I don't mean like general people in fashion. Like, I don't mean like people that say, that's gay, bro, because you wear flares. Those are not the people that go to the runway shows. So I'm going to be very honest with you. Because when I go to fashion runway shows, it's, fashion editors and buyers and, photographers and influencers and like people that are actually involved, like people that actually go to the shows and all that stuff. That's the circle jerk of it. That's kind of like the bubble. And then I see people do activism within that bubble. And I don't think it hits the same, because I think if you want it to be effective, your activism should be actually outside of the bubble. Like for example, if someone is like, men need to, and this is like the kind of activism that I see in fashion, right? I see activism, I guess, in fashion where people are like, men need to be themselves more and just wear what they want to wear. And all of us just looking at each other like, that's a straight man wearing a skirt. That's a straight man wearing a handbag. That like you're preaching to the choir. Like your activism needs to be outside of here, not in this room. But yeah, I definitely agree with what they're saying in terms of like some political statements made on a runway show does nothing apart from circle jerk. But that's not always true, because some brands are so mainstream that everyone actually does see it. And then therefore, if you make a political statement in a runway show, everyone will see it. For example, Demna's runway show was super mainstream, obviously for controversial reasons, but everyone was talking about it. So if your brand is that big enough, you can build, if you make a very controversial political statement, or you do like political activism on like a Gucci runway show or a Balenciaga runway show or like a Louis Vuitton runway show, yes, everyone's going to see it. And the YouTube channels that talk about politics that have never talked about fashion a day in their lives are going to cover it. And that's kind of what's going to happen. So I don't know if I fully agree, but I agree. I agree that sometimes, yes, a lot of the political statements in fashion, it's like, bro, you're preaching to the choir, but not all the time. There are definitely political statements and runway shows that you can make that are actually genuine political statements that everyone will see, for sure. People are arguing with me about fashion being a safe space. So in the world, I don't think anywhere in life is a complete and utter 100% safe space. I'm just talking about compared to other industries, right? Like the people I meet in fashion are way more open-minded than people I meet like outside it, like from that work in different industries, right? So that's what I mean. Like on average, of course, there's still toxic people. Fashion has all the allegations in the world. I mean, photographers abusing models, sometimes underage models, and they make like models do sexual favors for certain campaigns. Designers, like people that work in the business side of fashion, make designers do sexual favors to get certain positions. Yeah, let me not even go into it, but yes, there's toxic things that happen in fashion, just like any other industry. But on average, I would say that fashion is definitely more of a safe space than most other industries, to be fair. To be fair. It's true. People throwing paint at the Mona Lisa to protest climate change. Guarantee that curators care just as much. Luke said, did someone say sexual favors? I can get places doing that. I mean, if you're a consenting adult, even though I still think that you can never really consent when someone in a huge position of power, I just think that the power dynamics means that even if you think you consent, do you really? But if that's what you want with your life, then who am I to say no? You're an adult. Make your own decision. Carson, Dominique, what is your take on fashion having to represent something? A lot of people believe fashion has to always have deep philosophical inspirations, and they don't. It's okay to just make pretty clothes. Yeah, so I totally agree with this. And it's funny, right? So this is crazy that you guys are on the same wavelength as me. So I was on a call with one of my friends, Micah. A lot of you will know who he is. Earlier today, and we were having this conversation around like how fashion is communicated, and if me personally, if I need to change the way that I communicate about fashion, because I feel like I have a very, pragmatic way of talking about fashion. And the reason why I talk about fashion that way is because I work in the industry and I see things for what they are. So I don't like to mince my words. I don't like pretending. I feel like a lot of people that are lauded as like super intelligent, like fashion critics, I genuinely feel like a lot of them say a whole bunch of nothing, but because they kind of sound intelligent, saying a whole bunch of nothing, people are like, oh my God, this person's the best fashion critic. Like they're such a like intelligent mind. And basically I was just going back and forth with Micah, like, should I change the way I communicate with fashion and add some of that philosophical dribble jabble just to like make my critique sound more like, what's the word? Have that extra level of pizzazz, right? Should I add some baked beans into my critiques to make it sound more frivolous? So we were having this conversation, like a deep conversation around like how fashion is communicated, certain people that communicate in certain ways. And that led into kind of a lot of people just not understanding that clothing can just be aesthetically nice and it's okay. Like a lot of people like to like add meaning to things where there's no meaning. And I find it really weird. I find it so strange. Like there are so many designers that I'm friends with behind the scenes that genuinely just think about silhouette and aesthetic. And I see people doing these like deep dives on their work. And it's like, bruh, like that they just spend a lot of time doing research in silhouettes, which is actually very valid. Like the deep research they do about, you know, how clothing was in certain time periods in the 18th century and trying to modernize that. That's where the interesting thing is. But normally when I see people, you know, reacting to these people's work, it's normally, you know, this is a commentary on late stage capitalism and all that sort of stuff. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, no, like actually the research is more about silhouettes from certain time periods like the 16th century and actually how you can modernize it. And that's actually what this collection is about. But because it sounds smart and it sounds intelligent, a lot of people do that shit where it's like, yeah, and it was inspired by this and it sounds intelligent. But someone like me who works in the industry and knows these people personally is just like, that's just not true. But yeah, I do think this is a thing. This is like a big issue with the way that fashion is communicated, where people have to, you know, force deep philosophical inspirations on clothes where there is nothing there. Like a lot of people like to, you know, do that. And it's really, you know, it's really like that. It is like that for sure. But I do think that being said, certain designers are intellectual though. I think it just depends. Like, okay, I'll give you examples. Tebe Magugu is an extremely intellectual designer. And Tebe Magugu's work intellectually has layers to it. Like, because that's basically one of his focuses in his work. So when you're reviewing Tebe Magugu's work, you might have to read, I mean, you don't have to, but me as a critic, if I want to review it effectively, I might have to read some books that he's referencing. I might have to watch some films that he's referencing to truly understand, right? Because Tebe Magugu's work is about some like deep stuff. So he's an example. I think J.W. Anderson, sometimes it's about the aesthetic and, you know, referencing certain time periods. Sometimes it is actually very intellectual. So I think certain designers do that, by the way. It's not like I'm saying no one does that. What I was kind of alluding to is there are many examples I see of people, you know, saying that or trying to force intellectualism where there is none there for designers that don't even consider that at all. A good example is Phoebe Philo. Like Phoebe Philo, where her genius comes in is her ability to mix different textures, fabrics, things that we don't think should work, but they work. That's kind of the genius of Phoebe Philo. Like the way she styles things, like the way she mixes things, it's actually really amazing. But then people try to force some other intellectual stuff that has nothing to do with Phoebe Philo's work. And that's where people lose me a lot of times. Oh yeah, Phoebe Philo was commenting on it. It's like, not really. So I think it just depends. But yeah, people do that. People do that. Culture says, I love when people can articulate what their collection is actually about. If it's about the collar or whatever, stand on it. Yeah, for sure. I like what Al said. I said there's no beauty without context though. Yeah, but the context is different. So did you see how I added context to every single type of designer? So I said some designers, the genius is in kind of the time periods that they're referencing and the fact that they're trying to modernize clothing from a certain time period. Some people's genius is in their ability to mix different textures and fabrics. Some people's genius is actually in like a more intellectual kind of understanding of things, or it's like a commentary on society and culture very specifically. So people's work can be genius from many different angles, but what I see, and this is what I was talking about, the issue is that people force something that's not there. So a designer that their genius is about their ability to, you know, reference different time periods and modernize them, you'll get a journalist who their whole stick, like there's journalists who their whole stick is trying to like add, like, let me give a very specific example. Like their journalists, their whole stick is they talk about philosophy. So every single fashion like thing has to have a philosophy spin on it. And they kind of force philosophy where it's not there. Like, yes, what this designer was thinking about when they designed this was this, that, this. And that's like their whole brand. Their whole brand is, I look at the like philosophical understanding that this designer had when they were designing, and then they apply that on every single collection by every single designer. And that's where the issue comes, because then they can't, they then become bad journalists and bad critics, because it's like, you now have no ability to actually understand why that designer is good. Because like, I talk about this all the time. There are so many designers that are legendary, but they're all legendary for different reasons, right? So Oswald Boateng is legendary because apart from like things you want to mention, like, you know, race, being the first black man on Savile Row, all that sort of stuff. Part of the genius of Oswald Boateng is that Oswald Boateng is a designer that completely changed the face of British tailoring. Because before Oswald Boateng, if you look at Savile Row and a lot of the Savile Row tailors, all of them stuck by a very rigid understanding of rules and what British tailoring has to be. The wide lapels, the shoulders had to be a certain way. The shoulders had to have, you know, a certain shape, whether there was padding or no padding. The trousers had to be wide in a certain way. There's just so many rules. And when Oswald Boateng came in, he was like, well, I can reference British tailoring and add an element and change different elements to it, right? I can add a slimmer lapel. I can make suit not the, you know, traditional colors like navy, gray, or like the typical twee colors like brown and stuff like that. You know, I can actually make a purple suit and it can still be British tailoring. And because Oswald Boateng did that, if you look at Savile Row now in 2025, there is a vast range of aesthetics of tailoring on Savile Row because of people like Oswald Boateng, right? That is why he's a legend. That is a very different thing to why, I don't know, you know, Rei Kawakubo is a legend, because Rei Kawakubo changed our understanding of, you know, how garments can be constructed, and that garments can be made very deliberately. Like, you can actually make garments that aren't supposed to be worn at all. And you can make garments where the seams are actually, you know, not finished because there's like an emotional idea that she's trying to portray through the clothing. Like, that's completely different. So, see what I mean? Like, Oswald Boateng and Rei Kawakubo can both be fashion legends and make completely different clothing, be trying to achieve completely different things. And as a journalist, when your whole stick is everyone has to have a philosophical angle on every collection that they make, you're not able to appreciate designers bringing different perspectives to fashion, if that makes sense. And that's the big issue that I have. And that's kind of what I was alluding to. But yes, you can see there's definitely like a validity to everything that designers do. The validity is just in different realms, if that makes sense. So that's where it is. There's right. I commented that before you got your commentary, and I think people reaching like that still adds value. It's what they see in it. I don't know. I think people know kind of what I'm talking about when I'm like, people actually force it. This YouTube channel runs on your support. If you want to support the channel, you can subscribe to my Patreon. You'll gain access to exclusive content that includes everything from my Patreon podcast, where I give a behind-the-scenes insight into the fashion industry, as well as a fashion book club, where I review my favorite fashion books. You can also check out my fashion ebook, which highlights the best fashion journalists to follow, definitions of common fashion terminology, and how to determine what a good source of fashion information is. The links to everything are in the description below.